When my wife started stripping and said, "There's nothing wrong with it, it's just dancing," I simply replied, "Then do your dancing without a husband," and left her. Hey everyone, my name is Tyler, and I'm 29 years old. I've been married to Victoria for 6 years now, and we've been living in Miami where I honestly thought life was pretty good. I work as a marketing manager at a decent company, and our life seemed stable and comfortable. Looking back now, I realize I should have paid attention to the warning signs much earlier than I did. The first time Victoria came home late, I didn't think much of it. People have late nights at work, plans run over, traffic happens. The second time felt maybe a little weird, but still within the realm of normal. But by the seventh time she walked through our front door at 2:15 a.m., something had fundamentally shifted. There was this stupid smirk on her lips that I'd never seen before, and she carried the unmistakable smell of expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. Something inside me started to rot that night. I don't mean it boiled over with anger or broke cleanly like glass. It was worse than that. It began rotting slowly from the inside, like fruit left too long in the sun. The decay was quiet, methodical, and impossible to ignore once it started. That particular Tuesday night was when everything truly started unraveling, though I didn't understand the full scope of what was happening yet. Victoria tossed her designer purse onto our granite kitchen counter with the casual confidence of someone coming back from yoga class, not whatever performance she claimed to be rehearsing for these days. She moved through our apartment like someone who lived completely alone, offering no glance in my direction, no hello, no acknowledgement of my existence whatsoever. She walked straight to our stainless steel refrigerator, opened a bottle of sparkling water, and took this long, deliberate drink with her back turned to me. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, and then she finally said it, "Oh, you're still awake." I had been sitting there in the dark for 3 hours, positioned where I had a full view of the front door. 2 untouched Corona bottles sat on our glass coffee table, growing warm and forgotten. I said absolutely nothing in response to her casual observation. The whole scene felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold in front of me. Victoria stood there in her ridiculous sequined crop top, her makeup still way too perfect for this time of night. Her hair was curled in this specific, elaborate way that I hadn't seen her do in years. The kind of styling that suggested she was going to a photo shoot or maybe a first date, not some random Wednesday night dance practice that supposedly ran until past 2 a.m. She saw the look on my face and it didn't faze her one bit. There was no surprise, no guilt, no attempt to explain herself or apologize for the late hour. Instead, she just looked at me with this cold detachment that felt like a slap across the face. "Don't give me that look," she said, shutting the refrigerator door way too hard. The sound echoed through our kitchen like a gunshot. "It's just dancing." I stared at her across our kitchen, and the room fell into this dead, suffocating silence. There was something about the way she said those words, "It's just dancing," that felt like a challenge thrown down between us. It wasn't an explanation or a reassurance. It was like a dare, as if she was testing how much I would tolerate, how far she could push before I finally reacted. That's when I said it. The words came out of me calm and deliberate, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Then dance without a husband." I walked out of that kitchen without another word, leaving her standing there with her perfect makeup and her secrets. That moment, that's where it technically started, where the end of our marriage began. But looking back now, I realize it didn't really start there at all. I should have noticed all of this much earlier, should have paid attention to the gradual changes that had been happening right in front of me. We've been married for 6 years now, and Victoria used to be completely different. She used to be warm and playful, a little chaotic in a way that kept our relationship alive and exciting. I fell for her precisely because she made every room louder and brighter just by walking into it. She had this infectious energy that drew people to her like a magnet. But over the last year and a half, something fundamental in her had started drifting away from me. She became more polished, more calculating, and increasingly cold in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. Everything about her began to feel rehearsed and artificial, like she was playing a character named Victoria, who happened to have a husband named Tyler. But she didn't actually feel anything genuine about him anymore. She picked up new hobbies that deliberately didn't include me, made new friends that I was never introduced to or invited to meet. She started using words like energy and alignment in casual conversation, the same pseudo-spiritual language she used to roll her eyes at when other people used it. It was like watching someone slowly transform into a stranger while wearing the face of the person I married. Then came the dancing obsession. Salsa dancing, specifically. This was the same woman who used to make fun of couples who posted choreographed TikTok videos in their kitchen, calling them desperate for attention. Now she was completely obsessed with Latin dance nights, and not in a casual, fun way either. She went all in with designer dresses that cost hundreds of dollars and private lessons that she scheduled multiple times per week. There was also this guy named Carlos she brought up constantly in conversation. She always mentioned him like he was just another instructor, someone completely harmless and professional that I had no reason to worry about. She talked about him so casually and frequently that it almost felt intentional, like she was trying to normalize his presence in her life by making his name familiar to me. I trusted her completely during this time, which I now realize was my biggest mistake. Victoria became increasingly secretive around her iPhone, something that had never been an issue before in our entire relationship. She started locking her MacBook with passwords, claiming she was building some kind of new personal brand and needed to protect her business ideas from potential theft. I believed every word of it like a complete idiot. I even bought her a new Canon camera for her little home content studio, thinking I was being supportive of her entrepreneurial dreams. She kissed me on the cheek when I gave her that camera and told me I was her rock. Yeah, her rock? Heavy, stupid, and just sitting there doing nothing while she built her secret life around me. One Thursday afternoon, everything changed in a way that shattered my remaining illusions about our marriage. Victoria had left her iPad unlocked on our bed, which was unusual since that device had never required a passcode before. She was in the shower at the time, and I wasn't even trying to snoop or investigate anything suspicious. I simply walked over to pause the music that was playing from the device. But as my finger was halfway to the screen, a message banner flashed across the display that made my blood turn to ice. It was from Carlos, and it read, "You said you'd delete last night's video. I can't stop watching you on top of me." My hand pulled back from the iPad like the thing was literally on fire. I didn't even know how to move or what to do with what I'd just seen. I stood there completely frozen in our bedroom, my stomach churning and turning to ice, while I tried to process the reality of what those words meant. In the background, I could hear the shower still running, the sound of water beating down against the tile in our bathroom. Victoria was humming some cheerful pop song in there, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd just accidentally exposed the truth about what she'd been doing. The casual, carefree sound of her humming felt like she was casually destroying everything we had built together over 6 years, and she didn't even realize I now knew about it. I didn't open the message to read more. I didn't touch anything else on that iPad or try to investigate further. Instead, I sat back down on the edge of our bed and tried to make sense of what had just happened. The humming stopped abruptly. The water turned off, and I heard her drying off with our towel through the bathroom door. When the bathroom door finally opened, Victoria walked out wrapped in a white towel, looking at me like I was just another piece of furniture that she didn't remember buying. Her expression was completely neutral, showing no awareness of what she'd left behind on that screen. "What's up?" she asked, casually drying her hair like she had absolutely no idea what bombshell she'd just accidentally left exposed for me to see. I didn't ask her about Carlos. I didn't mention the message or demand an explanation for what I'd discovered. I just stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman standing in front of me with the person who had apparently been making videos with another man. She met my eyes directly and tilted her head with this questioning expression. "What?" she asked again. But this time there was a little smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. It was the kind of smirk that people wear when they've already won some game that the other person doesn't even know they're playing. That's when I realized with crystal clarity that Victoria wasn't actually hiding anything from me, at least not in the way I'd assumed. It wasn't because she was particularly bad at lying or covering her tracks. It was because she genuinely didn't care anymore if I found out about her affair. She had already emotionally moved on from our marriage, and my discovery of her betrayal was simply irrelevant to her at this point. I didn't sleep at all that night. Sleep was completely impossible when my mind was racing with the implications of what I'd learned. Victoria curled up next to me in our bed like absolutely nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't just been messaging a man about intimate videos they'd made together. Her arm draped over me in the darkness, soft and practiced like muscle memory from years of sleeping together. For the first time in our entire 6 years of marriage, her touch made my skin crawl. There was something fundamentally different about lying there next to someone who had betrayed me so completely, even though she was acting like everything was perfectly normal between us. By morning, something profound had shifted inside me. It wasn't like flipping a light switch where everything suddenly became clear. It was more like the slow, heavy grinding of gears that had been rusted in place for months, finally starting to turn again. The movement was deliberate, irreversible, and marked the beginning of something I couldn't take back. I didn't ask Victoria anything about what I discovered. I didn't confront her about the message or demand explanations for her behavior. Instead, I made a conscious decision to simply watch and wait. She continued going through the motions of our daily routine, rehearsing her role as my wife with what seemed like practiced perfection. Every morning, she made her protein smoothie, put on her black yoga pants, and opened her MacBook in our sunroom, where she pretended to build her mysterious personal brand. She was texting constantly now, always with her head down and always with this fake, secretive grin on her face. I noticed she'd changed her phone settings so the screen would go dark much faster than before. Like she thought I wouldn't notice that tiny flicker of guilt between her fingers every time she quickly hid what she was doing. That Saturday, Victoria told me she had a dance workshop scheduled across town that would last all day. She explained that it was an intensive training event and mentioned she might stay overnight at Kate's house afterward because they were planning to get drinks and she didn't want to worry about driving back home late at night. Kate. That name had become like a magic word in Victoria's vocabulary. Every single lie she told me was carefully wrapped in Kate's name, like protective packaging. I used to think Kate was just one of those convenient friends that all women seem to have. Someone who was always mysteriously available to back up whatever story needed backing up, but vague enough that you never had to hear too many details about her actual life or personality. Now I was starting to realize that in all our years together, I had never actually seen Victoria and Kate in the same room together. Not even once. I couldn't recall a single instance where I'd met this woman who was supposedly such a close friend that Victoria could crash at her place whenever she needed an alibi. So I decided to call Kate directly. She answered the phone sounding groggy, probably still hungover from whatever she'd been doing Friday night. "Hey Kate, quick question," I said, keeping my tone casual and friendly. "Is Victoria staying with you tonight?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. She didn't say anything to me about that," Kate replied, confusion clear in her voice. "Why are you asking?" I smiled to myself, though it wasn't because the confirmation felt good. I smiled because it verified everything I already knew to be true about the elaborate web of lies Victoria had been weaving around me. "No reason," I said calmly. "Thanks for letting me know." I didn't text Victoria to give her a chance to twist the situation or come up with some new explanation. Instead, I got in my truck and drove across town to the hotel she'd mentioned going to before during one of her previous late nights. It was the same upscale place with the trendy bar tucked behind those dark, smoked glass windows that made it impossible to see inside from the street. I parked 3 spots away from the main entrance and settled in to wait. My stomach felt like it had turned into a tight knot of cold steel, but my mind was focused and clear in a way it hadn't been for months. No more guessing, no more wondering, no more making excuses for behavior that couldn't be explained away. I was finally going to see the truth with my own eyes. At exactly 8:15 p.m., Victoria's car pulled into the parking lot. She was wearing a white dress that I immediately recognized, the same elegant dress she'd worn to our anniversary dinner 3 years ago. Her hair was perfectly curled, her red lipstick was flawless, and she looked absolutely stunning. But there wasn't a duffel bag in sight, no yoga mat, no dance shoes, and certainly no Kate anywhere to be found. 3 minutes later, Carlos walked out of the hotel lobby. I knew it was him immediately, even though I'd never seen him before. You could just tell by the way he carried himself, the way he leaned into Victoria when he approached her, and the way she tilted her head back and gave him this slow, theatrical laugh. The kind of genuine, delighted laugh that she hadn't given me since sometime back in 2021. They didn't walk into the hotel holding hands, but they didn't need to. The intimacy between them was obvious in every gesture, every glance, every subtle movement. He opened the door for her with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it many times before, and she floated through it like she belonged there with him. I sat there in my truck, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the last ember of my marriage blink out behind those sliding hotel doors. Victoria came home the next day at 11:30 a.m., and it was immediately obvious that she was still wearing the same hair and makeup from the night before. Her curls were still perfectly styled, but slightly disheveled in that unmistakable way that happens when you sleep on expensive salon work. Her makeup was smudged and faded like it had been painted on her face 22 hours earlier, which of course it had been. The most infuriating part was that she didn't even pretend to be tired from her supposed night of innocent socializing with Kate. Instead, she walked into our kitchen and performed this elaborate theatrical yawn like she was recovering from a relaxing weekend at some luxury spa. She poured herself coffee with the casual confidence of someone who had absolutely nothing to hide. "Good night?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral and curious. She froze for just a second, barely a flicker in her shoulder, but I caught it. Then she recovered and continued her performance. "Yeah," she said, keeping her back turned to me as she stirred her coffee. "It was fun. We didn't end up going to the workshop after all. Just chilled at Kate's place instead. She made that lentil soup you always complain about hating." I leaned against our kitchen counter, arms crossed, and delivered the line I'd been preparing since yesterday evening. "Yeah, I called Kate." That did it. Victoria turned around slowly, coffee mug in hand, but she wasn't surprised or panicked like I'd expected. Instead, she just looked mildly annoyed, like I'd caught her hiding a shopping bag from an expensive store, not cheating on me with another man in a hotel room. "What are you doing, Tyler?" she asked, her tone suggesting that I was the one behaving inappropriately. "What do you mean?" I replied, genuinely curious to see how she planned to spin this obvious lie. She actually rolled her eyes at me. She stood there in our kitchen, still wearing the evidence of her affair, and rolled her eyes like I was being unreasonable for questioning her story. "You're going through some weird phase," she said dismissively. "First the jealousy, now the stalking behavior. What's next? Are you going to start checking my underwear when I get home?" The audacity of it was breathtaking. She was trying to make me feel guilty for discovering her lies, turning the situation around so that I became the villain in her narrative. "Did you stay at a hotel with him?" I asked directly, cutting through her deflection tactics. Victoria laughed in response. Loud, theatrical, and far too sharp to sound genuine. "Oh my God, you're actually losing it," she said, shaking her head like I was having some kind of mental breakdown. Then she simply walked away from me. Not because I had defeated her with my questions, and not because she felt any shame about being caught in multiple lies. She walked away because she knew she had been completely exposed, and her response was to treat me like I was the one acting crazy. That was her strategy now, and it became crystal clear to me in that moment. Gaslight me, dismiss my legitimate concerns, and flip the entire situation so that I appeared to be the unstable one. She was still trying to win some twisted game that I hadn't even realized we were playing, even though the marriage itself was already over. What struck me most profoundly was the realization that Victoria didn't love me anymore. Not even a little bit. It wasn't that she had fallen out of love gradually, or that we had simply grown apart over time. She had actively chosen to deceive me, betray me, and then mock me for having the audacity to notice what she was doing. I didn't talk to Victoria for the rest of that Sunday, and she barely noticed my silence. There were a few passive-aggressive sighs here and there, a slammed cabinet door or two, but no actual effort to reach out, explain herself, or apologize for anything she'd done. She just moved through our house like a storm cloud with perfect hair, acting like I was the one who needed to clear the air and make things right between us. I watched her from across our living room that evening. She was curled up on the couch with her legs tucked under her, scrolling through her phone like she was browsing through the aftermath of someone else's life. Occasionally, she would smile at her screen, a slow, secret smile that she thought I couldn't see. I didn't bother asking who was making her smile like that, because I already knew the answer. Monday morning arrived, and Victoria woke up earlier than usual. She dressed much quicker than normal, choosing tight jeans, a black blouse, and heels, an outfit that was far too polished for whatever she claimed to have planned for the day. The familiar cloud of expensive perfume followed her around our bedroom as she got ready. "I'm meeting a supplier downtown," she announced casually. "Probably going to grab lunch afterwards, so I'll be out most of the day." I nodded silently, chewing my toast like it was made of concrete while I watched her perform this latest lie with practiced ease. She kissed the top of my head, my damn head, like I was a child or a pet, and walked out our front door like absolutely nothing had happened between us. I followed her again, and this time I didn't feel even a flicker of guilt about it. I needed to see the full scope of her deception with my own eyes. I stayed back 5 or 6 cars behind her, keeping my surveillance casual and unobtrusive. Victoria didn't go downtown. She didn't meet any supplier for her imaginary business. Instead, she pulled into the exact same hotel parking lot as before. This time, it was during broad daylight, with no attempt to hide or show any shame about what she was doing. I parked across the street and sat there with my hands gripping the steering wheel, blood pounding in my ears like a drum. I waited 35 long minutes, staring at those sliding glass doors, wondering if she would come back out or if this was going to be another extended stay. She didn't come out. She was upstairs with Carlos again, and this time I understood that it wasn't just about the cheating anymore. It was about the certainty of it, the comfortable repetition, The complete lack of guilt or hesitation. Victoria wasn't making mistakes or slipping up occasionally. She was living a completely separate life with another man, and she had apparently forgotten to send me the memo that our marriage was over. I didn't go home after witnessing Victoria's second hotel rendezvous. Instead, I drove straight to my brother's place, needing to talk to someone who would give me an honest perspective on what was happening. Ryan had always harbored some reservations about Victoria from the very beginning of our relationship. He thought she was fake and calculating from day one, but he'd never pushed those opinions on me or tried to interfere in our marriage. He was the kind of brother who kept his mouth shut and let me make my own mistakes. I told Ryan everything that had been happening. I laid out the entire timeline. The late nights, the lies about Kate, the message I'd seen on the iPad, the hotel meetings, all of it. He listened without interrupting, just sat there with his arms crossed and his jaw getting tighter as the story unfolded. When I finally finished explaining the whole mess, he looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. "So, what are you going to do?" he asked. That's when I realized I genuinely didn't know what came next. I had methodically gathered all the pieces of evidence I needed. I had documented her lies, witnessed the hotel meetings, seen the explicit message from Carlos, and confirmed that her alibis were complete fabrications. I had watched her face when she chose to smirk instead of confess, when she decided to gaslight me instead of showing any remorse. But despite having all this overwhelming proof of her betrayal, I didn't actually have a plan for what to do with it. I had spent so much time and mental energy watching Victoria fall completely out of love with me that I had forgotten to decide what came next for my own life. That night I went home to face whatever new performance Victoria had prepared for me. She was already there when I walked through the door, standing barefoot in our kitchen with a wine glass in her hand and music playing softly from her phone. She turned around when she heard me come in, looking genuinely surprised to see me. "Oh, I thought you were working late tonight," she said, as if my schedule was something she actually kept track of anymore. That's when I decided I'd had enough of playing her games. I walked up to her with calm, deliberate steps and took her phone from the kitchen counter, holding it up between us like evidence in a courtroom. Victoria lunged for it immediately. This wasn't a playful reach or some casual attempt to get her phone back. She lunged like I was holding her oxygen supply, like that device contained her entire ability to breathe. The desperation in her movement told me everything I needed to know about what was hidden in there. I stepped back, keeping the phone out of her reach. "Who is he?" I asked simply. She blinked and hesitated for just a moment, then transformed back into that polished actress, that professional con artist who had been living in my house for months. "Tyler, you're being insane," she said, her voice taking on that condescending tone she'd perfected. "You're completely obsessed with this paranoid fantasy. It's honestly embarrassing to watch." I nodded calmly, pretending to scroll through her phone while I delivered the information that would shatter her carefully constructed lies. "I know about the hotel," I said matter-of-factly. Victoria stiffened like she'd been struck by lightning. "I know you've been meeting him there," I continued. "I saw you twice. You lied directly to my face, Victoria. You lied every single time I asked you about where you were going and what you were doing." And then she laughed. Not a guilty laugh, not a nervous or embarrassed laugh, but something cold and calculating. "You followed me around like some kind of stalker? What are you, 12 years old? Jesus Christ, Tyler." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't even remotely sorry for what she'd done. There was no shame, no regret, no acknowledgement that she had betrayed our marriage vows and destroyed my trust. Instead, she was attacking me for having the audacity to discover her affair. Victoria put her wine glass down on the counter and leaned against it, crossing her arms like I was the one who should be under interrogation here. "You want me to feel bad about this? Is that what this is?" she asked, her voice dripping with contempt. "You haven't touched me in months, Tyler. You walk around this house like some sad ghost who's already given up on life. And now you want to throw a fit because someone else made me feel wanted for 5 minutes?" My heart stopped beating for a moment as those words hit me. She saw the impact they made, and I could tell that she liked watching them land. She enjoyed hurting me with that revelation. "Carlos actually listens to me," she continued, driving the knife deeper. "He doesn't treat me like background noise in his own life." I almost laughed right there at the sheer irony of what she was saying. The projection was breathtaking. I had been drowning in silence and emotional neglect for over a year, desperately chasing scraps of connection and intimacy from a woman who had already checked out of our marriage. And now she was accusing me of not listening to her, of not making her feel valued. I put her phone down on the counter and looked directly into her eyes. "I want a divorce. I said clearly. Victoria stared at me for several long seconds. That simple statement had broken her script entirely. She had expected me to beg, to cry, to plead with her to work things out or give me another chance. She had never considered that I might actually be strong enough to walk away from her. "You're serious," she said, blinking in what appeared to be genuine shock. "Dead serious," I replied. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw Victoria falter. Just for a second, her carefully maintained facade cracked. It wasn't guilt that I saw underneath. It was never going to be guilt with her. It was fear. Not because she had realized she was losing me, but because she suddenly understood that she was about to lose control of the entire situation. "No," she said firmly, as if she had the authority to make that decision for both of us. "We're not doing this like that. You don't get to suddenly act like the victim here." "I'm not acting," I said. "I am the victim. You lied, you cheated, and you tried to make me think I was crazy for noticing what you were doing." She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For once in her life, Victoria was completely speechless. I left the room without another word. She didn't follow me, and she didn't try to continue the argument. She didn't say goodnight, and she didn't attempt to explain or apologize for anything she had done. That silence told me more than any conversation ever could have. I didn't sleep in our bed that night. The thought of lying next to Victoria after everything that had been said felt impossible and wrong on every level. Instead, I spent the night on our living room couch, staring up at the ceiling and surrounded by shadows that no longer felt like they belonged to me. Every creak and settle of the house sounded unfamiliar, like I was squatting in someone else's life rather than living in my own home. Victoria didn't come out of the bedroom at any point during the night. She didn't say goodnight, didn't try to talk things through or explain her behavior, and didn't make any attempt to salvage what was left of our marriage. Her complete silence spoke volumes about where her priorities really lay. In the morning, Victoria acted like absolutely nothing significant had happened between us the night before. She emerged from our bedroom dressed in black leggings and a cropped hoodie, her hair tied up in a messy bun, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline to her real world. She poured herself coffee and looked directly at me sitting on the couch, as if my presence there was just a minor inconvenience in her daily routine. "You're being dramatic," she said matter-of-factly. Not "are you okay?" or "can we talk about what happened?" Just a dismissive judgment about my reaction to discovering her affair. It was like she was already preparing her narrative for when she would inevitably tell her friends and family that I had suffered some kind of emotional breakdown. She was getting ahead of the story, making sure she could frame herself as the reasonable one who had tried to work things out with an unstable husband. I said nothing in response. I was completely past the point of trying to reason with someone who was already 3 steps ahead in rewriting our history and didn't care whether I ever caught up to her version of events. "I have a meeting," Victoria added, grabbing her keys with practiced casualness. "You mean another hotel room?" I asked, my voice flat and emotionless. That stopped her, but only slightly. She didn't flinch or show any sign of shame or embarrassment. Instead, she just tilted her head and gave me this look that was pure contempt mixed with exhaustion, like she was tired of having to deal with my inconvenient awareness of her lies. "If you're going to be petty about this, I'll just go," she said. And she did exactly that. Victoria walked out of our house with no apology, no denial, and no attempt to fight for our marriage. Her complete indifference to the devastation she had caused was more telling than any argument could have been. That same day, I went to see a lawyer. Not because I was completely ready to end my marriage yet, but because I desperately needed some clarity and a sense of control over a situation that had been spiraling beyond my grasp for months. After walking through emotional fog for so long, I needed something solid and concrete to hold on to. The lawyer, Patricia, was sharp, quick, and completely business-focused. I gave her all the facts in a straightforward manner: the affair, the hotel meetings, the systematic lying, and the gradual emotional erosion of our marriage over the past year and a half. She nodded through most of my explanation, scribbling notes and barely blinking as I laid out the timeline of Victoria's betrayal. "Do you have proof of the affair?" Patricia asked when I finished. "Yes," I replied. "Multiple instances." "Good," she said simply. "That will definitely help your case." I left Patricia's office with a folder full of legal options and possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a little less weight pressing down on my chest. The situation wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, but at least it was moving forward now. And more importantly, for the first time in months, I was the one making it move. When I got home that evening, Victoria was already back. She was sitting at our kitchen table with her laptop open, her phone placed face down beside her, showing off freshly manicured nails. She looked up when I walked in and squinted at me with suspicion. "Where were you?" she asked, as if she actually cared about my whereabouts or had any right to question my activities. "At a lawyer's office," I said simply. Victoria blinked slowly as that information registered. That definitely got her attention in a way that nothing else had recently. "Are you serious about this?" she asked, closing her laptop with deliberate slowness. "I was serious yesterday, and I'm still serious today," I replied. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms, that fake calm barely covering the panic I could see starting to creep into her expression. "This is going to get ugly," she said, like she was warning me about consequences I hadn't considered. "You already made it ugly," I responded. "I'm just catching up to where you've been for months." Victoria stood up and placed her hands flat on the table, leaning forward slightly. "Tyler, come on. People cheat. People move on from relationships. Don't pretend like you were some perfect husband through all of this." I actually laughed out loud at that point. I couldn't help myself. "I wasn't perfect, Victoria, but I didn't lie to your face every single day. And I didn't sneak off to hotels with another person while you were at home rehearsing speeches about being misaligned and needing space." She stood up straighter, her hands still on the table. "Oh, so now you're going to act like a saint?" "No," I said, meeting her eyes directly. "I'm just not you." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria didn't know what to say to that response. She wasn't used to this version of me, the one who stayed calm under pressure and refused to be manipulated by her emotional games. She was accustomed to the version of me who apologized for making her feel guilty, who smoothed things over before she even had to explain her behavior, who took responsibility for her actions and emotions. That man was gone forever, and we both knew it. That night, Victoria texted Carlos. I know this because she left her phone on our kitchen table for once, abandoning her usual paranoid secrecy. I saw the screen light up as she walked into the bathroom, and I couldn't help but glance at the notification that appeared. "Victoria, he's talking divorce now. We need to be careful." A few seconds later, Carlos responded, "Don't panic. You said he never finishes what he starts." I stared at those messages for a moment, then locked the screen and sat back in my chair, letting the full implications of what I'd just read settle into my mind. They weren't just having an affair behind my back. They were actively mocking me, plotting around me like I was nothing more than a side character in my own marriage. They had discussed my personality, my habits, my perceived weaknesses, and they were using that information to strategize against me. But that was going to be the last moment that either of them would have the luxury of underestimating me. I was completely done being treated like a fool, and I was ready to start planning my own moves instead of just reacting to theirs. Victoria began getting nervous over the next few days, though not in the panicked, flailing way you might expect. Instead, her anxiety manifested as calculated caution, like someone who was sensing that the tides were changing, and the sand under her feet wasn't as firm as she had previously thought. She became much more careful around me. Her tone softened considerably. Her casual insults disappeared completely, and for the first time in many months, she actually cooked dinner. She made pasta of all things, the same dish she had always dismissed as being too boring and carb-heavy to be worth the calories. She lit a candle on our dining room table, poured me a glass of wine, and waited until I sat down before she launched into what was clearly a prepared speech designed to reset our relationship dynamic. "I've been thinking," Victoria said, her voice taking on an artificially gentle tone. "Maybe we rushed into all this divorce talk without really considering what we're throwing away." I stared down at my plate, noting the perfect spiral noodles and the garnish that she had obviously Googled instructions for. This was a meal designed to manipulate me, to create an atmosphere of domestic harmony that hadn't existed in our house for over a year. "Oh," I said neutrally, not giving her any emotional response to work with. Victoria nodded encouragingly, like she was proud of herself for this insight. "We've been through a lot together over the years. Maybe we just lost track of each other somewhere along the way." Notice that she didn't use any specific words. Not "sorry," not "I messed up," not "I betrayed your trust." Just the vague, collective "we" that implied we had both somehow wandered into this situation together, like we had mutually agreed to destroy our marriage as a team project. I didn't respond, so Victoria kept going with her pitch. "I mean, I get that you're hurt by everything that's happened," she continued. "But do you really want to throw away 6 years of marriage over something like this?" Something like this. That's how she characterized her months-long affair with another man. Not as a devastating betrayal or a fundamental violation of our wedding vows, but as a minor inconvenience, like choosing a bad restaurant without consulting me first. Now we were supposed to laugh about the bill and head home together. I looked up at Victoria with complete calm and clarity. "You're not sorry," I said simply. She blinked in confusion. "Excuse me? You're not sorry, Victoria," I repeated. "You're not remorseful about anything you've done. You're just trying to maintain control of this situation." "That's not true," she protested weakly. "Did you end it with Carlos?" I asked directly. Victoria didn't answer that question. She couldn't because we both knew what the truth was. I stood up from the table and pushed my plate away. The perfectly prepared pasta barely touched. That's what I thought. Her carefully constructed expression finally broke. Victoria dropped her fork and let her chair slide back too fast behind her, the pretense of calm domesticity crumbling around her. "Tyler, don't do this!" she said, her voice rising with desperation. "You're not thinking clearly about any of this." I walked around the table and leaned close to her, speaking quietly but firmly. I have never seen anything more clearly in my entire life. Victoria folded her arms defensively, her voice climbing toward panic. "So you want to throw everything we've built away over one mistake?" "One mistake?" I actually laughed at that point. "Was it just once, or was that just the first time I caught you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria had no answer for that question because there was no good answer. Then, very quietly, she said something that was probably the first completely honest thing she'd said to me in months. "You were boring, Tyler. You stopped being interesting to me. I needed something more than what you were giving me." Strangely, those words didn't hurt the way she intended them to. Not because they weren't cruel, they absolutely were, but because they represented the first genuine truth she had shared with me in ages. She had decided that I wasn't enough for her anymore, and rather than having an adult conversation about our relationship problems, she had chosen to fill that need by lying, sneaking around, and humiliating the man who had supported her dreams and caught her when she fell. I let that moment hang in the air between us, allowing her to hear the echo of her own words and understand exactly what kind of person she had revealed herself to be. Then I walked upstairs to our bedroom, pulled my suitcase from the closet, and started packing my clothes. Victoria followed me upstairs, and now she was genuinely frantic. The calm, manipulative woman who had been trying to control the narrative just minutes before was completely gone, replaced by someone who was starting to realize that her usual tactics weren't going to work this time. "Wait, what are you doing?" she asked, watching me fold clothes methodically and place them in my suitcase. "I'm moving out," I said simply, not looking up from my packing. Victoria actually laughed at that, but it was a harsh, disbelieving sound. "You think I'm going to just stay here and let you run off with the sympathy card? This is my house too, Tyler." I paused in my folding and looked directly at her. "Yeah," I said calmly, "and the mortgage is in my name." That shut her up immediately. Victoria's mouth snapped closed, and she watched me continue packing in stunned silence. For all her scheming and planning, she had apparently forgotten about the practical realities of our financial situation. The house, the mortgage, the major assets, they were all tied to my income and my credit, something I had never thrown in her face during our marriage, but which suddenly became very relevant. 25 minutes later, I zipped my suitcase closed and grabbed my keys from the dresser. I turned to face Victoria one final time before walking out of the bedroom that had become a battlefield. "This didn't happen to us, Victoria," I said, making sure she understood the distinction. "You did this. You made these choices, you told these lies, you betrayed our marriage, and you don't even regret it. You just regret getting caught." I walked down the stairs with my suitcase in hand, and Victoria didn't follow me. As I stepped out the front door into the cold night air, carrying everything I needed to start over, I realized something that I hadn't allowed myself to feel in weeks. Freedom. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling like I was drowning in lies and manipulation. I was finally free from the suffocating atmosphere of deception that had taken over my own home. I stayed at Ryan's place that first night. He gave me a spare room without asking any questions, just tossed me a set of clean sheets, and left a cold beer on the nightstand. It was a quiet gesture of brotherhood that didn't need words or explanations. He understood what I was going through and what I needed, which was simply space to process everything that had happened. That night I lay on a mattress that wasn't mine, under a ceiling that didn't hold years of memories, both good and painful. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel surrounded by lies and betrayal. The room was neutral, clean, free from the emotional baggage that had been weighing me down for months. Victoria didn't call that night. She didn't text me. She knew I was gone, and she made no effort to chase after me or try to repair the damage she had caused. That silence spoke louder and more clearly than any apology ever could have. It confirmed everything I had come to understand about where her priorities really lay. But Carlos, interestingly enough, didn't stay quiet. 3 days after I moved out, I received a message from an unknown number that caught me completely off guard. "Man to man, this doesn't have to get messy. You guys can work this out. She still cares about you." I stared at my phone screen, at first thinking someone was playing an elaborate prank on me. But then another message came through from the same unknown number. "I didn't know you were still together when this started. She told me it was already over between you two. I didn't mean to blow up your life like this." And there it was, the first crack in the carefully constructed mirror that Victoria had built around her affair. Carlos wasn't gloating about stealing another man's wife or bragging about his conquest. He was nervous, defensive, and apparently just as much a victim of Victoria's lies as I had been. I didn't respond to his messages. I had no interest in playing emotional chess with a man who had brought wine and cologne to my marriage bed, regardless of what Victoria had told him about our relationship status. But I did screenshot both messages and immediately sent them to Patricia, my lawyer. She replied within 2 minutes. "Perfect, thanks. This definitely helps our case." I started methodically building a comprehensive case file. I gathered bank records, printed photos of the hotel for my surveillance, and made copies of text message logs that showed the timeline of Victoria's deception. Our joint bank account revealed unexplained charges that lined up suspiciously with Victoria's so-called dance nights, expensive meals, ride-sharing services, and one particularly damning receipt for champagne and room service that coincided with one of her supposed workshops. The more evidence I compiled, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't just a heartbreak or a marriage falling apart due to natural incompatibility. This was something much more calculated and deliberate. Victoria hadn't just cheated on me emotionally and physically. She had systematically siphoned away pieces of my trust, my self-confidence, and my financial resources until I was too emotionally depleted to react appropriately to her betrayal. The legal case was shaping up to be much stronger than I had initially hoped, and I was finally starting to feel like I had some measure of control over a situation that had been spiraling beyond my grasp for far too long. I sent Victoria an email rather than trying to have another face-to-face conversation that would inevitably turn into manipulation and gaslighting. I kept the message completely free of emotion and structured it like a business communication. Victoria, for our final conversation about this matter, here are the first steps toward filing for an uncontested divorce. I have retained legal counsel and I strongly suggest you do the same. Tyler. I attached a bullet point list of terms and conditions that Patricia had helped me prepare. Victoria replied 3 hours later with a subject line that read, "This is childish." Her message said, "Are you seriously turning into one of those guys? The ones who weaponize lawyers and run away from difficult conversations instead of trying to work things out like adults? I didn't expect you to fall apart like this, Tyler. You're acting like a victim in a situation that you helped create." I didn't respond to her email. She wasn't angry because I had left the marriage. She was angry because I had left it cleanly, without providing her with the messy emotional breakdown she had been hoping for. Victoria wanted me to be shattered, yelling and begging for another chance. That kind of reaction would have made her feel justified in her actions and given her ammunition to use against me later. But I refused to give her that satisfaction. The next day, I received a phone call from a mutual friend that made my blood run cold. It was Jessica, who had worked with Victoria at one point and had always tried to stay neutral even after things got weird between us. But now, she sounded genuinely uneasy and concerned about something she felt I needed to know. "Hey Tyler, I thought you should be aware of something," Jessica said carefully. "Victoria's been saying some things about you to people we both know." "What kind of things?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew where this conversation was heading. "She's been telling people that you were emotionally abusive during your marriage," Jessica said quietly. "She's claiming that you had serious anger problems and that she was actually scared of you toward the end." The room started spinning around me as those words sank in. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Jessica paused for a moment, then continued. "I want you to know that I don't believe any of it, Tyler. But I'm worried that other people might. Especially people who don't know you as well as I do." There it was. Victoria's next strategic move in this chess game I hadn't even realized we were playing. She couldn't argue with the facts of her affair, the hotel meetings, or the systematic lying she'd been caught doing. So instead, she had decided to completely rewrite the narrative of our entire marriage, painting herself as the brave survivor of an abusive relationship rather than the cheating wife who had been caught red-handed. This was her way of getting ahead of the story, of controlling the public perception before I had a chance to defend myself. She was transforming herself into the victim in a situation that she had created and orchestrated through months of deliberate deception and betrayal. That night, I sat down at Ryan's kitchen table and wrote out everything that had actually happened in our marriage. I documented every time I had paid for Victoria's failed business ventures, every dance lesson I had encouraged her to take when she said she needed a creative outlet, and every therapy session I had suggested when she complained about feeling disconnected from our relationship. I wrote down every instance where I had supported her ambitions, covered her expenses, and tried to address her concerns about our marriage. I also documented every time she had made me feel like I wasn't enough, wasn't interesting enough, wasn't giving her what she needed emotionally or physically. I wasn't building this timeline to destroy Victoria's reputation or to wage some kind of public relations war against her. I was building the record of what had actually happened because the truth has its own power when it's laid out clearly and honestly. Truth doesn't need dramatic lighting or emotional manipulation. It just needs someone who's brave enough to stop being afraid of looking at it directly. The next morning, Patricia called me with an update on Victoria's legal response. She had retained her own lawyer and was now pushing back aggressively against our initial terms. "She's demanding spousal support," Patricia informed me, her tone indicating that she wasn't particularly surprised by this development. "Her lawyer is claiming that she gave up her career opportunities to support your professional advancement during the marriage." I actually laughed out loud at the audacity of that claim. "Her career was a candle-making business that never sold a single product," I told Patricia. "I built her website for her, I paid her Shopify subscription fees for 3 years running, and I covered all her supply costs. She never gave up anything to support me." "I know," Patricia replied calmly. "We have all the financial records to prove that. But what really gets me is that she's asking to be financially compensated for walking away from a marriage that she destroyed through her own actions." The sheer entitlement of Victoria's position was breathtaking. She wanted to be paid to leave cleanly after months of betrayal and deception. This wasn't about grief or trying to rebuild her life after a difficult divorce. This was pure strategy. She was trying to cash out on the marriage she had systematically dismantled through her affair with Carlos. This revelation lit something inside me that had been dormant for months. I started writing again, but this time not for legal purposes. I wrote for myself, to process everything that had happened, and to make sense of the psychological manipulation I had endured. I wrote about the night I found the earrings that didn't belong to me. I documented the exact way Victoria had smirked when I first mentioned divorce, like she had been waiting for me to finally catch up to where she'd been emotionally for months. I transcribed the voicemail message I'd found, and I described the precise moment when she leaned against our kitchen counter and told me I wasn't interesting anymore. The more I wrote, the clearer the entire picture became. Victoria hadn't been confused or lost or going through some kind of midlife crisis. She had been deliberate, calculated, and systematically cruel in a quiet, polished way that didn't leave visible bruises, but caused permanent psychological damage. That same week, Victoria showed up unannounced at Ryan's house. She didn't call ahead or ask permission. She just pulled into the driveway in her white SUV and walked right up to the front door, like nothing fundamental had changed between us. Ryan wasn't home when she arrived, so it was just me who answered the door. I stood in the doorframe without inviting her inside, keeping my expression neutral and my arms crossed. Victoria smiled at me with that practiced charm she'd perfected over the years. "Can we talk?" she asked, tilting her head like we were old friends catching up. "You've got 5 minutes," I said flatly. She clearly hadn't expected that response. Her face twitched slightly, barely perceptible, but I caught it. She was used to me being accommodating, to opening the door wide and welcoming her in regardless of how she'd been treating me. Victoria sighed and folded her arms, making herself appear smaller and more vulnerable. "I didn't think things would escalate this far. I never meant to hurt you the way I obviously have." I waited in silence, watching her perform this carefully rehearsed apology. She looked down at the ground, then back up at me with what she probably thought was a remorseful expression. "I made some mistakes, and I know that. But do we really want to become enemies over this? Do we want to destroy each other in court?" I tilted my head slightly. "You told people I was emotionally abusive," I said calmly. Her eyes widened in what appeared to be genuine surprise. "What? No, that's not. I never said anything like that. You told our mutual friends that you were scared of me," I continued. "That I had anger problems." "I never said." She started, then stopped herself, took a deep breath, and reset her approach entirely. I didn't mean it that way, Tyler. I was just venting to people, trying to explain why things felt so difficult between us lately. I stared at her steadily. You rewrote our entire marriage to make yourself look like the victim. Why would you do that? Victoria stepped forward slightly, her mask slipping just enough for me to see what was underneath. Because I didn't want to look like the bad guy in this situation, she said honestly. You were the bad guy, I replied simply. That was the first time I saw Victoria really look at me. Not at the man she thought she could still manipulate. And not at the version of me who would fold under pressure the second she used her soft voice and apologetic tone. She was looking at a version of herself she didn't think I was capable of becoming. Someone who wouldn't flinch under her manipulation. Someone who saw through her performance. Someone who simply would not be moved by her tactics anymore. I want what I'm owed, Victoria said suddenly, and in that moment the mask completely cracked and fell away. Gone was the apologetic, vulnerable woman who had just been trying to make amends. In her place stood someone cold, calculating, and openly mercenary. I gave you my 20s, Tyler, she continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. I supported you through everything. You don't just get to walk away from this marriage like I was nothing to you. I actually laughed at that. You supported me? The irony was so thick, I could barely breathe through it. Victoria, I was paying your rent before we even moved in together. You bought a camera and called it a business venture. I've been financially supporting your dreams and failures for years. You're being cruel, she said. But there was no real hurt in her voice, just frustration that her strategy wasn't working. No, I replied firmly. I'm being honest for the first time in months. You should try it sometime. Victoria looked past me into Ryan's house, as if some ghost of our former relationship still lived there, and she could somehow rewind the clock through sheer force of will. But it was all gone now. Every bit of affection, trust, and partnership that we'd built over 6 years had been systematically destroyed by her choices. You won't win this, she said softly, but there was a threat lurking underneath the quiet words. I'll make sure of that. I nodded slowly. You've been trying to win this entire time, I said. That's the fundamental difference between us, Victoria. You treated our marriage like it was some kind of contest that you needed to dominate. I treated it like it was a promise that I intended to keep. She turned around without another word and walked back to her car. I watched her drive away, and as her taillights disappeared around the corner, something inside me finally shut off completely. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't sadness. It was the last flicker of hope that maybe, somehow, we could have salvaged anything meaningful from the ruins of what we'd once had together. Victoria simply wasn't capable of genuine remorse, and I was finally done building bridges for someone who enjoyed lighting everything on fire. The next few days moved like walking on broken glass, slow, sharp, and deliberately painful. Every step forward hurt just enough to remind me how deep all of this had gone. But I didn't stop moving forward. I continued gathering every document, every message, every timestamp that could help build my case. I called Patricia twice a day to update her on new evidence and to strategize about Victoria's increasingly aggressive legal posture. We lined up detailed timelines, documented account withdrawals, and tracked irregular financial transfers that Victoria had made during the height of her affair. Patricia was impressively ice-cold and surgically efficient in the way she approached building our case. Every lie Victoria had told, every deception she had crafted, every manipulation she had attempted. We now had documentary evidence and receipts for all of it. But Victoria wasn't planning to go quietly into that good night. I started getting phone calls from mutual friends, people who had been at our wedding and had smiled in photos that were now buried under digital dust. At first, the tone of these calls was cautious and concerned. Hey man, just checking in on you, they would say. Victoria mentioned that you guys were going through some rough stuff. Then the tone began to shift in a way that made my stomach turn. Victoria told me you've been struggling with some anger issues lately, one friend said carefully. She mentioned that you got kind of obsessive about tracking her movements. Obsession. There was that word again. The same term Victoria had carefully chosen for her public relations campaign against me. Not hurt or betrayed or devastated by discovering an affair. She was calling my natural reaction to her systematic deception an obsession, as if I was just some insecure, controlling husband who couldn't handle his wife's independence and personal growth. It was like she was trying to convince people that the hotel meetings, the text messages, and the voice recordings were all just hallucinations that I had stitched together in my paranoid mind to punish her for the crime of being alive and pursuing her dreams. But I didn't defend myself to these mutual friends. I didn't feel the need to justify my actions or explain what had really happened. The truth was building its own momentum now, and the cracks in Victoria's carefully constructed narrative were becoming harder and harder for her to paint over with charm and manipulation. And then came the twist that I absolutely did not see coming. It was Thursday evening around 7:45 p.m. Ryan and I were sitting on his front porch, eating takeout and talking about mundane things that had nothing to do with my imploding marriage. When a silver sedan pulled into the driveway, I recognized the license plates immediately. It was Carlos. He got out of his car looking like a man who was caught somewhere between genuine guilt and raw fear. His shirt was tucked in neatly, he wore a nervous smile, and his eyes kept scanning the porch like he wasn't entirely sure whether I was going to meet him with words or with my fists. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough uncertainty to make it clear that he wasn't entirely confident about this decision. Ryan stood up immediately. "I'll be inside," he said to me, giving Carlos one hard look before disappearing through the front door. He understood that this was something I needed to handle on my own. I didn't stand up from my chair. "You've got 60 seconds, I said flatly. Carlos rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "Look, I didn't know about your situation at first," he began. "Victoria told me that you two were separated, that you'd been emotionally checked out of the marriage for a long time. Did that story sound true to you?" I asked. "Or just convenient?" He didn't have a good answer for that question. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, looking down at his shoes like they held some kind of wisdom. "She's been telling people that I pushed her into the affair," Carlos said quietly. "That I took advantage of her when she was vulnerable. She said she's thinking about filing some kind of legal complaint against me if this divorce ends up costing her financially." I stared at him as the full implications of what he was saying sank in. "She's not loyal to anyone, is she?" I said, more as an observation than a question. Carlos shook his head slowly. "I thought I actually mattered to her," he admitted. "She made it seem like we had something real and meaningful together. But now I don't even know if she meant any of it, or if I was just another tool she was using. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Welcome to the club," I said dryly. Carlos sat down on the edge of the porch step, not too close to where I was sitting. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for whatever that's worth to you," he said. "I shouldn't have gotten involved in your marriage, regardless of what she told me about your relationship status." I didn't answer immediately. Then I said something that surprised both of us. "You didn't break my marriage, Carlos. You were just the last nail in a coffin that Victoria had been building with every lie she told for months." He nodded quietly, seeming to understand what I meant. Before Carlos left, he handed me something that would change everything. It was a small flash drive, and he held it out to me like he was passing me something dangerous. "Victoria sent me a bunch of videos and messages over the past few months," he explained. "She told me to delete all of them, but I figured you might need the truth more than she needs her secrets protected." Carlos walked back to his car and drove off without another word, leaving me standing there holding that flash drive in my hand. It felt cold and small, but heavy in the way that a bullet is heavy, not because of its physical weight, but because of the damage it had the potential to cause. That night I plugged the drive into Ryan's laptop, and what I found there was worse than anything I could have imagined. There were 6 videos on that flash drive, and each one was more devastating than the last. The first one showed Victoria dancing in a hotel room, wearing that white anniversary dress I had recognized from the parking lot. She was laughing, her lips stained with wine, moving to music I couldn't hear through the recording. Carlos's voice could be heard in the background, encouraging her, telling her how beautiful she looked. The second video was much worse. It was Victoria sitting on the edge of a hotel bed, talking directly to the camera with a cold, calculating expression I had never seen on her face before. "He'll never leave," she said with absolute certainty. "He's too weak to actually follow through with anything. I can do whatever I want." There was a third video of her pacing around what appeared to be the same hotel room, talking on the phone with someone I couldn't identify. "I don't care what he finds out at this point," she was saying. "Let him spiral and fall apart. It actually makes me look better when this goes to court, having a husband who's clearly unstable." And then there was silence in Ryan's spare bedroom. Just me sitting in that chair, staring at a laptop screen, watching everything I had thought I understood about the woman I'd been married to for 6 years rot and decay in front of me. But the videos didn't break me the way Victoria might have hoped they would. Instead, they freed me from any lingering doubt or guilt I'd been carrying about ending our marriage. I didn't need to wonder anymore whether I was overreacting or being too harsh. I didn't need to torture myself by remembering good moments from our relationship and asking whether any of them had been genuine. I had the truth now, documented and undeniable. Victoria had been planning and strategizing against me for months, not just cheating on me, but actively working to destroy my credibility and my self-confidence. She had been setting me up to look like the unstable, jealous husband while she positioned herself as the long-suffering wife who was finally brave enough to seek happiness elsewhere. I emailed the video files to Patricia immediately, along with a brief explanation of how I had obtained them. She replied within minutes. "This changes everything. Thank you." For the first time in weeks, I slept through the entire night. Not because the pain had disappeared, or because I had stopped caring about what Victoria had done to our marriage. I slept because I finally knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts had been correct, and that every decision I'd made since that Tuesday night when I told her to dance without a husband had been the right one. The final week before our scheduled court date arrived faster than I had expected. It felt like the entire universe had shifted into place around me, with every lie Victoria had told and every strategic move I had made since discovering her affair funneling toward this one decisive moment. Victoria, predictably, tried one last desperate play to regain control of the situation. It came in the form of a text message that arrived late at night. "We don't have to destroy each other like this, Tyler. We can settle this like adults who once cared about each other. You're not gaining anything from turning our divorce into a war." I stared at that message for a long time, recognizing it for what it really was. Victoria wasn't reaching out from a place of genuine remorse or love. She was cornered now, backed into a legal position that was becoming increasingly untenable. And when people like her feel the walls closing in around them, they don't apologize or accept responsibility. Instead, they try to negotiate from a position of fear, hoping to minimize the consequences of their actions. I didn't reply to her text. Instead, I forwarded it to Patricia with no additional comment. She responded with a single line, "Hold steady, it's almost over." 3 days later, Victoria and I sat across from each other in a glass-paneled mediation room in downtown Miami. Her lawyer was polished and composed, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Victoria had chosen to wear white again. She always selected white clothing when she wanted to perform innocence for an audience. She didn't look at me when I walked into that room with Patricia. Victoria sat rigidly in her chair, staring straight ahead like I was just another piece of furniture that she didn't want to acknowledge. Patricia placed the USB drive on the conference table between us, like it was some kind of holy relic. "We have video evidence," she said in a calm, professional tone. "And we have documented statements showing a pattern of deception, misuse of joint funds, and deliberate emotional manipulation. My client is willing to settle this matter quietly and efficiently, but let's not mistake his willingness to avoid a public trial for weakness." Victoria flinched visibly, the first genuine emotional reaction I had seen from her in weeks. Her lawyer leaned in close and whispered something in her ear that I couldn't make out. Victoria's lips tightened into a thin line as she processed whatever advice she was receiving. Then, for the first time since I had walked into that room, Victoria looked directly at me. She didn't smile, didn't smirk, and didn't try to manipulate me with false vulnerability. She just watched me with a kind of cold assessment, like she was seeing me clearly for the first time in months. I didn't react to her stare. I simply watched her back, letting her process the realization that her usual scripts and manipulation tactics weren't going to work anymore. The man sitting across from her was no longer someone she could twist with half-truths and crocodile tears. Victoria didn't cry during the mediation. She didn't beg or plead or try to salvage our relationship. Instead, she folded completely under the weight of the evidence Patricia had assembled. Her lawyer adjusted their settlement offer significantly. No spousal support, no claim to my pension, no demand for half of our shared assets. Victoria agreed to waive any financial claims against me in exchange for keeping the boutique inventory from her failed candle business and the second car I had bought her the previous Christmas. It was over in 32 minutes. The walk to the elevator afterward was surreal. Victoria and I stood side by side, waiting for the doors to open, like two strangers in a bank line who had no shared history or connection. I could feel her glancing at me occasionally, testing the emotional atmosphere between us, trying to gauge whether there was any possibility of reconciliation or forgiveness. As the elevator arrived and the doors slid open, Victoria finally spoke. "I never meant to hurt you like this, Tyler," she said quietly. I nodded once, not with forgiveness or understanding, but with simple acknowledgement of what she had said. "Yes, you did," I replied calmly. You just thought I would never be strong enough to leave. Victoria looked down at her feet, pressing her lips together like she was trying to keep something inside. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped inside alone. She didn't follow me. She just stood there in the hallway, gripping her purse like it might somehow contain whatever version of me she thought she still had power over. As the doors closed between us, I saw something in Victoria's expression that I had never seen before. Genuine regret. Not because she missed me or realized that she had destroyed something beautiful, but because she finally understood that I wasn't coming back. Ever. Back at Ryan's house that evening, I sat in the driveway for a long while before going inside. The sun was dipping behind the rooftops, casting that golden hour haze that softens everything and makes even the most ordinary moments feel significant. I looked down at my hands resting on the steering wheel and realized something profound. They weren't shaking anymore. For the first time in months, I wasn't consumed by anger, wasn't drowning in bitterness, and wasn't even particularly sad about what had happened. I was simply free. Free from the lies. Free from the manipulation. Free from the suffocating atmosphere of deception that had taken over my own home. That night, I took the cardboard box of wedding photos that I'd been avoiding for weeks and carried it out to the fire pit behind Ryan's house. I watched the edges of those pictures curl and blacken in the flames, watched our smiles melt away into ash and smoke. I wasn't burning them out of anger or spite. I was burning them out of necessity. Some stories need to be completely destroyed before you can breathe freely again. For the first time in years, I could take a full, deep breath without feeling like I was drowning. A month passed after the divorce was finalized, and it was marked by something I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Genuine peace. There were no late-night text messages from Victoria, no dramatic phone calls, no last-minute attempts to manipulate the situation or rewrite our history. Just a clean, healthy silence that felt less like absence and more like fresh air finally filling my lungs after a long, brutal storm. I moved back into the house. My house. I had it professionally cleaned from top to bottom, bought new sheets, changed all the locks, and purchased a completely new couch. I kept some of the furniture that didn't carry emotional baggage, but everything that held even a trace of Victoria's presence went either to the curb or to local donation centers. Starting over didn't mean I was trying to erase the past or pretend that my marriage had never happened. It meant I was refusing to live in the shadow of someone else's betrayal. I repainted the bedroom walls, not because I desperately needed the color change, but because I needed to reclaim ownership of the space that had become a battlefield. Sometimes I would catch myself walking down the hallway and unconsciously bracing for something. An argument, a cutting comment, or the cold silence that used to greet me whenever I came home. Then I would remember that Victoria wasn't there anymore, and the quiet in my house stopped feeling heavy and oppressive. Instead, it started feeling peaceful and restorative. Word got around our social circle, as it always does in situations like this. A few of our mutual friends reached out to check on me. Some of them apologized for believing Victoria's version of events without questioning it, while others simply pretended that the whole mess had never happened. The friends who had chosen to stay neutral during the divorce, I let them go without a fight. I had learned that neutrality in situations involving clear right and wrong is really just passive loyalty to whoever tells the most convincing story. And Victoria had always been louder and more persuasive than me. I heard through Jessica that Carlos had left the state entirely. Apparently, he'd said something about needing a fresh start somewhere new. He probably thought that changing his zip code would somehow rinse off the guilt and shame of what he'd been part of. I don't wish him well, but I don't wish him harm either. I simply don't wish him anything at all. That's the difference between moving on and moving through trauma. Moving on tries to erase and forget everything that happened. Moving through trauma means accepting what occurred, processing the pain it caused, and then climbing out of the wreckage. Maybe bleeding and scarred, but fundamentally alive and stronger. One evening, about 7 weeks after the court had signed our final divorce papers, I was going through some old files in my home office when I found a photo strip from our second anniversary. It was one of those old-fashioned photo booth strips with 4 little frames showing 2 people who genuinely looked happy together. I stared at those images for a long time, trying to reconcile the smiling faces with everything I now knew about what Victoria had been capable of. These pictures showed a version of us that might have been real at the time, but which had been systematically destroyed by choices that only one of us had made. I folded the photo strip in half and put it in a desk drawer. Not because I wanted to preserve it as some kind of memento, but because I wanted to let that version of our relationship stay properly dead and buried. Victoria texted me one final time, Exactly 4 months to the day since I had walked out of our house with my suitcase. The message simply said, "Just wanted you to know I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. I hope you're okay." I stared at that text message for a long moment, reading it twice to make sure I understood what she was trying to communicate. Then I deleted it without responding. Not because I wanted to be cruel or vindictive, but because I was finally done writing new chapters in a story that Victoria had already set on fire months ago. That evening, I sat outside on my back patio with a glass of bourbon in my hand and my dog at my feet. The sky above me wasn't offering any profound answers or spiritual revelations. It was just giving me space to exist without judgment or expectation. For the first time since this whole nightmare had begun, I wasn't searching for hidden meaning in Victoria's actions or trying to understand the psychology behind her betrayal. Instead, I was finding genuine peace in the choices I had made for myself. Victoria had said our problems were just dancing, and I had responded by telling her to dance without a husband. She did exactly that, and I had found the strength to walk away from the performance entirely. The most important thing I had learned through all of this was that healing doesn't come from understanding why someone chose to hurt you. It comes from refusing to let their choices define your worth or dictate your future. Victoria's affair said everything about who she was and nothing about who I was. Her lies reflected her character, not mine. Her manipulation tactics revealed her values, not my shortcomings. I was finally free to build a life based on my own choices rather than constantly reacting to hers. A month later, I was finally ready to truly begin my new life. No more texts, no more calls, no more late-night dramatics from Victoria. Just a clean, healing silence that felt less like something missing and more like air finally clearing after a long, brutal storm had passed through my world. I moved back into the house permanently. My house, as I had come to think of it. I had every room professionally scrubbed from top to bottom, replaced all the bedding, changed every lock, and bought myself a completely new couch. I kept some of the furniture that didn't carry emotional weight, but everything else that held even a trace of painful memory went either to the curb for pickup or to local donation centers. Starting over didn't mean I was trying to erase the past or pretend that my marriage to Victoria had never existed. It meant I was making a conscious choice to refuse to live in the shadow of someone else's betrayal and deception. I repainted the bedroom walls, not because I desperately needed the color change, but because I needed to psychologically reclaim ownership of the space that had become an emotional battlefield. Sometimes I would catch myself walking down the hallway and unconsciously bracing for something. An argument waiting around the corner, a cutting comment designed to make me feel small, or the cold, punishing silence that used to greet me whenever I came home from work. Then I would remember with relief that Victoria wasn't there anymore, and the quiet in my house stopped feeling heavy and oppressive. Instead, it started feeling peaceful and genuinely restorative. Word about our divorce got around our social circle, as these things inevitably do. A few of our mutual friends reached out to check on me and see how I was handling everything. Some of them apologized for initially believing Victoria's version of events without questioning her story or asking for my perspective. Others simply pretended that the whole ugly mess had never happened at all. The friends who had chosen to remain neutral throughout the entire divorce process, I let them drift away without putting up a fight. I had learned through this experience that neutrality in situations involving clear moral right and wrong is really just passive loyalty to whoever tells the most convincing or emotionally manipulative story. Victoria had always been louder, more charismatic, and more persuasive than me in social situations. I heard through Jessica that Carlos had packed up and left the state entirely. Apparently, he had told people he needed a fresh start somewhere completely new, away from all the drama and complications. He probably believed that changing his zip code and moving to a different city would somehow rinse off the guilt and shame of what he had participated in. I don't actively wish him well in his new life, but I don't wish him harm either. I simply don't wish him anything at all anymore. That distinction represents the difference between genuinely moving on and just moving through trauma without processing it. Moving on in a healthy way doesn't try to erase or forget everything that happened. Moving through trauma means accepting what occurred, fully processing the pain and damage it caused, and then consciously climbing out of the wreckage. Maybe bleeding and scarred, but fundamentally alive and stronger than before. One quiet evening, about 7 weeks after the court had signed our final divorce papers, I was organizing some old files in my home office when I discovered a photo strip from our second anniversary celebration. It was one of those vintage photo booth strips with 4 little black and white frames showing 2 people who genuinely appeared happy and in love. I stared at those images for a long time, trying to reconcile the smiling, affectionate faces with everything I now knew about what Victoria had been capable of doing to someone who loved and trusted her. These pictures captured a version of our relationship that might have been authentic at the time they were taken, but which had been systematically destroyed by choices that only one of us had made. I carefully folded the photo strip in half and placed it in a desk drawer. Not because I wanted to preserve it as some kind of romantic memento or reminder of better times, but because I wanted to let that naive, trusting version of our relationship stay properly dead and buried where it belonged. Victoria contacted me one final time, exactly 4 months to the day since I had walked out of our shared home with nothing but a suitcase and my dignity. Her text message was brief and seemingly innocent. Just wanted you to know I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened between us. I hope you're doing okay. I stared at that message on my phone screen for several long minutes, reading it twice to make sure I fully understood what she was trying to communicate and why she might be reaching out after months of silence. Then I deleted the entire conversation thread without typing a single word in response. I wasn't deleting her message because I wanted to be cruel or vindictive toward her. I deleted it because I was finally completely done writing new chapters in a story that Victoria had already doused with gasoline and set on fire months earlier. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage, and nothing left to forgive or forget. That same evening, I sat outside on my back patio with a glass of good bourbon in my hand and my dog lying contentedly at my feet. The sky above me wasn't offering any profound answers or spiritual revelations about the meaning of suffering. It was simply giving me space to exist peacefully without judgment, expectation, or the need to perform for anyone else's benefit. For the first time since this entire nightmare had begun over a year ago, I wasn't desperately searching for hidden meaning in Victoria's cruel actions or trying to understand the psychology behind her systematic betrayal of our marriage. I wasn't torturing myself by replaying conversations and wondering what I could have done differently to prevent her affair. Instead, I was finding genuine, lasting peace in the choices I had made for myself. Victoria had dismissively claimed that her months of deception were just dancing, and I had responded by telling her to dance without a husband. She had taken me up on that challenge, and I had discovered that I was strong enough to walk away from her performance entirely. The most important lesson I learned through surviving this betrayal was that healing doesn't come from understanding why someone chose to hurt you so deeply. True healing comes from refusing to let their destructive choices define your self-worth or dictate the direction of your future. Victoria's affair revealed everything about who she really was and absolutely nothing about who I was as a person, husband, or man. Her lies reflected her character, not mine. Her manipulation tactics revealed her values and priorities, not my shortcomings or failures. Her cruelty demonstrated her capacity for selfishness, not my inadequacy as a partner. I was finally free to build a life based entirely on my own authentic choices, rather than constantly reacting to and defending myself against someone else's deception and emotional violence. And that freedom, I realized as I sat there in the gathering darkness, was worth more than any marriage built on lies could have ever been.